now, so we will not be taking any of the actionable items. So as you can see on your agenda, the first would be the approval of minutes. That will get shifted to our next meeting. Hopefully we have a couple more members come together. The next item is an update on the council action regarding the housing plan, which was Councillor Tabor's update.
Oh, I can do that.
Do you have it?
I can
Okay.
too. Well, I'm just gonna say that it's going to the planning board next
Yes,
week
okay.
for review and comment, and then there are two public,
Two
Meetings,
public,
Two
sec-
public
I
hearings.
think
Yes.
the 23rd and the 28th, is that right?
Um,
I think so.
Of this month,
September
September.
23rd and September 28th.
that's fine.
I'm not certain if, are they both here or
I think one is a
in the library?
council,
What's gonna be it? Didn't I say? Oh, that was said on the council agenda.
yeah, one of them is, the 28th is on a council meeting and the 24th is here.
Wait, I have the 23rd.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 28th is council. So we will make sure they're confirmed and noticed properly of location.
And we can announce it again the next meeting.
Yes, Eric?
What will the planning board potentially do with what's being submitted to them in a review process or any process?
Well, so I've provided them with the draft that went to council, and my recommendation to them is to wait till after the public meeting to make a referral back to the council in case there's public input that might change it or might change their comments that they report back. Yeah, we'll just wait to get comments from them and
Okay. Thank you so much. And then, the next, any discussion on that? It's going to the planning board. Again, we have those two public hearings in September, so we would assume that the council will see it probably mid-October, so that the planning board can have time to review public comment that happens at the hearings. Okay, item number 3 on our agenda is RSA 79E. Some staff memorandum. Okay. Did everyone get a chance to review? No. Went out last week. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea was just to get people thinking about what 79E could do, and especially in terms of the housing opportunity zone. And so we sat down and talked about it a little bit amongst ourselves and then thought of questions that might be good for the committee to go over and consider. So then basically we came up with this list. Right now, the only community that has it in place is Conway. So we gave you Conway's version of it, but there's a lot of options and different ways to go about it, and so we could come back with a draft ordinance, but I just thought it'd be good to get some guidance on how you want it to look, where there's room to make some changes.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think if we want to go through the questions, you can do
I was
that.
just gonna say we can go, I think would be good. Just for group discussion, of course, unfortunately, Councilor Moreau is under the weather today, and I know that this has kind of been one of her babies. But we'll make sure to get her feedback too. So I think we can just open it up for discussion.
Yeah, fair enough. I appreciated the Conway material. I mean, reading through every part of the 79E is, I would say it's daunting because you have to pay close attention as you
Yeah.
roam through it. And seeing how Conway did that, at least to some degree, and see what its applicability is with Portsmouth, which, that probably still has to be assessed, but I did like the way it was presented, and I thought it was a valuable piece of information.
Yeah, so, and we just, we're talking about the housing opportunity zone piece, obviously, so in that regard, you know, what does the committee think is their goal for doing it? I mean, is it to get as many workforce housing units as possible, or to just make every opportunity to get some workforce housing? I don't know. There could be a lot of different goals, I guess. That you guys think about one.
I'll open the floor up for conversation.
I mean, obviously we need stock. We need stock of workforce housing and we need it as soon as humanly possible. But, what was the other RSA that they referenced in here? RSA 9B, the whole smart growth, RSA, that's how do we build in such a way as to honor character, maintain open space? Like, this is a discussion that we've had on multiple instances here about managing the politics of this while also being as effective as humanly possible. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that 79E opens up, and we should be agile in our approach so that we can take advantage of the ones that make the most sense. And I thought that the presentation that you cited from the March meeting, where they walked through some of the ways in which this has been utilized around the state, was pretty telling on the types of opportunities that we can have, and just the ways in which this can be implemented. And given the need in Portsmouth and just how much our economy depends on our workforce, especially the type of people who are being pushed out, the type of people that we employ or manage, I think this is a great tool to, in an intelligent, thoughtful way that both honors the community and doesn't ruin this opportunity for future to come, we can take advantage of this and make some action as quickly as humanly possible. Can I just ask a clarifying point though about 79E? As far as I understand it, the tax incentive is something that, so if we were to take a previously underutilized parcel or a building that had become derelict, the benefit to the city is that you are getting taxes off of a piece of land or a building that previously was not paying taxes, and the developer is getting a lower reduced tax burden.
I think that was the original sort of genesis of 79E, but there's different parts to 79E. So that's the revitalization part, and so a lot of communities used it for that exact reason. How do we get, and a lot of times communities partnered, so the town would, or the city would partner with the developer to get them to take advantage of a derelict building that needed rehab. And yeah, they'd start to get taxes on the existing value, which is probably pretty low compared to what they see. And then once they redevelop it and revitalize it, then the community, they'd have the revitalization done. Maybe they do an assessment, but they wouldn't tax them at that rate for X
Number of years, which it does seem the municipality has some controls over how long that time period is. And is that would that be a uniform time period, or would it be project based?
I think it's project based.
Well, is that generally true? Because is there, in 10 years, you're gonna go through two reevaluations of the city, of a town or a city or anything by state mandate, right? So where you assess the town at the completion of the rehabilitation of that property, it can have up to 2 periods of.
They could stay, well, I think, so I believe the way that the assessor explained it to me was they would get revalued at the derelict level. So the value of that land maybe, or maybe whatever improvements were on it would be made. So that assessment would happen, and their taxes might go up a little bit along those lines, but they wouldn't go up to the new developed property until the property was completed. Well, completed, the whole project was completed, then they'd get a new valuation after that. If that makes sense.
I thought I read it that you really couldn't change anything until the project was had
we'll have to check,
an
but
occupancy.
I think they can
Status.
change the value of the land, underlying land, or land or derelict building and land. But they can't add the value of the new building that's being built until that period has ended. But they have to complete the project and that period has to end.
So the real property can change, but the personal property won't change until the end, until it's completed.
I don't know if it's defined that way or all of it, whatever's there.
Just like, so
Yeah.
like when we're looking at an assessment,
We have to find an answer to that, because
Yeah.
that's a good question, because there's two, if it's 10 years, there's gonna be two revaluations. Yeah.
and whether it's, cause when you're looking at assessments, there's two line items,
Yeah.
building and land.
Right.
And so
Right.
we've seen in some areas where even say the buildings themselves or the homes themselves haven't jumped, the land value potentially has jumped. So that's what that's what,
And that's what we need to get clarification on from the assessor. Yep, how that would work. But that certainly wouldn't be taxed on the revitalized property until it was complete and it was whatever period you'd agreed upon.
Yeah.
Then that would go up. But just to make sure everybody's clear that a lot of these properties, like a housing opportunity zone, they could be, a multifamily building that needs to be revitalized, but it's not derelict. They are paying taxes.
Yes.
They're decent properties. They're just not to the level they could be, or they don't have workforce housing. So
But if they
that's,
were to take advantage of 799E, they would only be able to get those tax reductions if they were to add an affordability component to the building. So they couldn't just renovate their home and say, now, I'm the plan.
Correct.
Yeah.
they have to apply for this program.
and it's not, my understanding, it's not a deduction on what they would be paying. What they're currently paying is they're frozen, is
Frozen.
locked in, yeah.
Yep. Or on some other instances, there are, parcels of land that there's no building on and
Yeah.
there's no tax revenue generated and you can put a building in. The city is getting more money into their coffers even though it's not at the rate that they would
Yeah.
for a building that's not having an affordability component. To me, that's like the optics thing where we can pitch this as a win-win, to not only generate the units that we need, but also have people buying it because of the fact that the city's getting something out of this. This is not a handout.
Right,
And the other
sorry.
component would be that it has criteria to meet at an 8% AMI, right? If it doesn't
Yes.
meet that criteria, it's not eligible for any tax relief, right?
And Dover, we talked with Chris Parker at Dover about their program.
Cause they did it in the courthouse, right?
They did it in a courthouse building, and I think their criteria, not only do they get a higher tax rate, but they have to hit a certain level before they get the advantage. So they might have to pay back that discount they got if they don't develop a project that they said they were gonna develop. If it doesn't get to the level, so they have agreed upon terms that they're gonna make this much money, or they're gonna make this building this valuable over.
So there's a mechanism for enforcement, which is important too.
Yeah, exactly.
While we're discussing this, I think it's a great time that we had a handout from one of our audience members that from Progress Portsmouth that kind of talks about some of the questions that were in the staff memo that I think are good things for all of us to bring up. I think, and I was just Googling away at this, one of the questions was, what is Conway's ordinance actually produced? And so I think it's new that we don't actually know. But there actually is an article from today about some of the things going on in North Conway, some parcels of land that they are looking at the opportunity zone to actually identify. So I think that's interesting.
Are you talking about the article that kind of indicated the trend in New Hampshire?
No, it's an actual article about Conway
Oh,
and,
really?
and chat. And yeah, I literally just Googled it when this question was put up. I was like, oh, that's a great question. And this article was posted 7 minutes ago. Yeah. From the Conway Daily Sun about how there are two areas comprised of a northern tract generally extending of East Conway and a southern tract extending through South Conway that are the two areas that the select board are now looking at to define as their zones.
So their zone is not the entire town, it's a specific overlay zone?
That's what it seems like.
And they were somewhat specific in the language of 79E that like you need to identify, it has to be a downtown center.
Yeah.
That's what yeah.
You couldn't just say the entire city of Portsmouth is available as housing opportunity zones. We would have to identify it.
I think I misunderstood what Conway was doing, because I think I was reading Conway, and I'm like, oh, they did it the whole town. How would that work for Portsmouth? Could we identify like multiple town centers?
Yeah,
Well, I would
think
assume we would do like an overlay, kind of like we do with like the gateway
That's what Conway did,
overlay.
Yeah,
So
Okay.
you would do
and
like,
just pick the areas you wanna put in the overlay.
Okay.
And I think maybe some conversations with the assessor as well, you know, where does it make the most sense, where are people likely to take advantage of it, that, you know.
yes.
Could a property owner come to the city and identify the benefits of the overlay zone, what's specifically it's called,
Opportunity zone?
the opportunity zone, and say, I want my property to be designated, or does the city have to designate it
The
directly?
city would have to designate
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So you can't opt into it, quote unquote.
Okay.
Not
Would
that I
that be
know of.
considered more like spot? So,
If it was an individual.
yeah, if it was an
business.
individual lot, like, and so instead
So
I
you
would
couldn't
like,
spot zone yourself.
yeah.
But it's not, yeah, I mean, I think it would make more sense, the way it's structured, you'd have to just define your area.
Yeah.
You could have people lobby to have their area in, but I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the city's gonna decide where
Well, at
that
that
is.
particular point, you spot zoning to some respect, if that's what the developer wants, you know. I mean, Banfield Road has been brought up as, you know, a possibility, and I don't know.
I think the city has to see it as a benefit to the city,
Yeah.
and that's what ultimately the council's gonna decide upon. You know,
Yeah, that was one term that kept jumping out in the Conway, was public benefit.
Yes. Infrastructure and public benefit.
Like, I think we could all go around the table, and I think it would be aligned, but we all might have a different definition of what public benefit is. And this is not a capitalized term, so there's not a formal definition. And I'm curious if we will get to a point where we do have a formal definition.
I agree with you. I wonder. I mean, we have even, you know, over the last 4 years in this committee, there's been sometimes a fight of whether, you know, affordable or market rate housing is a, you know, community asset, or should people, you know, and a lot of us lobby that it is, you know. So I think that, but you have people on the other side that lobby separately. You know what I mean? That it's not worth the cost of infrastructure, the cost of, you know, all of that for a public benefit. So I wonder, like, I agree with you. I wonder if we'll ever be able to come to terms of when we talk about housing as a public benefit, as it relates to Portsmouth. I think there's other communities around the country who have made it very clear in like in the ordinances that they've written that housing, affordable housing, is a public best interest. Interesting. So going through some of these questions, so obviously, number one, what is the overall goal of this incentive? And it seems to be the goal for this committee is to increase below market rate and workforce housing as determined within the structure of 79E.
And specifically the housing opportunity zone
Opportunity zone,
part.
yeah.
Would it make sense to include languages to the why? So thinking about the question that Jerry shares around, does this still produce a home that's affordable in 20 years? It may not, but if there's a rolling process for people undergoing this, over time, there would be a continuation of affordability, but it would support like a more mixed income entry point to Portsmouth perhaps. So I don't know if adding in that type of language would be helpful, or just.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, in the original document, there was language about, you know, I think it was like 5 years that you could get the tax incentive. Obviously Conway opened that up. Is there any sort of limitation? Like, could we make this something that's 100-year covenant?
How long can the covenant be? Yeah, that's what we were wondering about too, is I don't know if there's a limit. You certainly can double the tax relief period. So if you give a 10-year tax relief period, you could put a 20-year covenant on it. That's pretty clear in the law, but it isn't necessarily clear that you could or couldn't go over that, I don't think.
And much like RKG sort of had that that matrix midpoint where the cost of development and the benefit to the community aligned, like could we set the tax incentive at a point where these are permanently affordable housing, but we've extended the tax incentive so long that it's appealing to a developer and is still going to make them money over, in the aggregate, as opposed to trying to just generate any sort of interest to create this type of housing and only having it be a bridge solution and not a long-term solution.
You know what I think that just made me I think it would be interesting to hear from some of, and they may not want to share, but it would be interesting to hear from some of the developers who have done 79E projects and okay, what is your game plan post tax incentive? Are you planning on scaling slowly? Are you planning on staying within the 80% AMI? Are you planning on going to full market rate right away? So obviously we know we lost obviously not 79E, but we lost some HUD financed housing that, why can't I think of the units? Yeah. Osprey still, no, behind where the movie theater used to be, behind Tor.
Oh,
Edgewood.
Yeah. When they're 30 years rolled off, they were, right on it. So I think it would be interested to maybe reach out or hear from a couple of developers, Eric is here, who have used and have current 79E projects. I just think of Chinburg and some of the stuff that they've done and some of the ones in Manchester, what developers are planning. We got a 15-year, we're hoping they roll it to 30, but if they don't, here's our plan. And because they have to have that in some type of pro forma for future planning. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I couldn't find, and it might have been there, but I just didn't locate it. Are they transferable? Anybody that applies for 79E, or we haven't even discussed TIFs, but are those transferable to another, to somebody else if the person wants to sell a property, or does it still have to meet the same? What are the rules for transferability?
I would imagine if they sold the property, they could transfer it, but I don't think they could transfer it to another property.
If they sold the property to another owner, I
think that person would probably
still meet the criteria.
I would think so. Yes.
You would
Well,
think
if
so,
it's-
right? But
if
I
it's a
didn't
deed,
find
probably-
it specifically anywhere in 79E, but it could have been there. And
We'd have to spell that out, but that seems like that would make sense, because otherwise you're gonna lose it, and you're
Right.
gonna lose the.
Yeah.
right, because anybody that owns that piece of property and it's got a tax incentive for so many years, it makes it advantageous to sell it and saying, hey, I got a house, your taxes.
And that's what we saw with the couple properties
I
in
mean,
Portsmouth.
it says in here, it shall be a burden upon the property and shall bind all transferees and assignees
Okay.
Oh,
of
okay.
such property. So I'd imagine if you sell it.
I couldn't find it, you found it pretty quick.
It's that transferee term. I'd be looking for buyer or seller. But yeah, I think that touches on what is here in the Progress Portsmouth, which is writing it deliberately, figuring out what we can and cannot put in. And again, maybe asking some developers who have used it, or communities that have used it, obviously we talked to Dover, but what other safeguards have other communities used, if any, or ones that they wish they would have put in. You know what I mean?
Lessons learned, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you found, you used Conway as an example or a template to look at for comparability, how it compares to the
For the
situation?
housing opportunity zone, not just for 79E, but for this
Just that
specific.
one component of 79E that people set up a zone for affordable housing, and they haven't done any, and no other community even has a housing opportunity zone. So we gave you the one that has been done in New Hampshire, but even that one,
Hasn't
no
produced any.
developers come in and used it yet. So we don't have good examples to show on that.
So I think that's why their select board is trying to
That-
push these parcels.
I'm
Would
sure.
that be
like-
comparative to the opportunity or comparative between the two towns and cities? You know, we have a whole different dimension of property here versus what they have up there.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to know what you thought, how to tease this out a little bit better.
I think it's just not been done.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Could the housing opportunity zone and the G not overlap? I mean,
Yeah.
we're kind of
Yeah.
already,
Yeah,
things
we're not
overlap all the time.
identified
It's
some
not
of
a
these-
zoning layer,
Yeah.
so it's just,
Cause it seems like we're, it's not apples to apples, but some of the work that's been done over the course of the past few years to open up the opportunities simpatico with what 79E can represent, and those two things are working in conjunction with one another. Maybe we have a little bit more control as a city of the types of projects that are getting done and that we're incentivizing.
We're offering developer a little bit like choices, like, hey, we have this zone that you can build some housing. On top of that, if you build, strictly affordable housing, we have more incentives to give you. So you're already thinking about building in the zone. Here are some actual things that could benefit our community. The question always lies to me is where? You know what I mean? It's one of those things I think we've said in this committee. Oh, I wish we would have all been here 15 years ago before all the mills were redone and, been able to do that. So the question, I do like with the housing opportunity zone that it can be new construction versus just revitalization. But the conversation is always where?
And it definitely can't be the whole town,
Oh, I don't know that that's true. I think it could,
Yeah.
probably.
cause wouldn't it,
But I don't know that you would do certain zones in the town, like, I don't know that you'd wanna do it in an industrial district.
Yeah.
Fair.
And do you wanna do it in single family district? Could you do a
Yes.
one home
Yeah.
housing opportunity zone? So a person who has a home is gonna make their home value to, stay at at a value that an 80% AMI person could afford. And that was a question we kinda had amongst ourselves, and it was, does this work for single family? And it seems like it does. The one thing that we struggled with a little bit was that it says in the law 1/3 of the units have to remain affordable. It doesn't say it couldn't be all the units or the 100% of the units, which is
Yeah.
one house. If you just did one home that they turned into an affordable home, then if that's 100% affordable, then you've covered that, check that box. So I think it's doable in a single family home. I just don't know. That's where the politics might come in too. I don't know
Yeah.
how people would feel about that.
Well, because I think I haven't been following it that closely, but like the broad, I skimmed over the article of in Dover where now they're talking about selling some of those smaller units. And people are like, well, what are you selling them for? Are we selling them permanently deeded as affordable, or are they being sold as affordable now, but then like the next person doesn't have to? And we've seen, deed covenants like at why can't I think of the name of Sage? Sage.
Yeah.
Those are how many years? 20?
50.
50 years. So like anytime they get sold, they still have to remain within that AMI bracket.
is there anything that we could add to what we did to increase, so if the tax incentive is 10 years, but ask for the affordability clause to be 50 years like that, so that it's not expiring? Although, or like have us scale it in some way, that would incentivize developers. So maybe not everyone would want 50 years, but like some sort of scale.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to talk to people like Jen that
Yeah.
have the development mindset, because she did say that this would make projects that aren't attractive to a developer attractive to a developer.
Yes.
But I don't know where that cutoff is. Is it 30 years, 50 years? Is there a cutoff? I don't know. So that, yeah, it's a good question. I just don't, that's a hard one to answer.
I mean, each project would have a sliding scale, right? Like the amount of they're not looking to make a break-even proposition. They want to still make the money that they were intending to make.
Yep.
And maybe it's a longer term of time or a shorter term of time, but I think it would be one of those things where we'd want flexibility written into the language to incentivize the developer, but also to protect affordability for as long as we possibly can.
But if we had too much flexibility, would that mean that everything is parsed out every single time, and then it would take a really long time for anything to be developed?
Probably.
I think this process would just be a negotiation with city council.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, you could have terms of at least, but then it could be, the council could request longer. So it's not gonna go to any land use boards or anything.
I mean, Joe, just to circle back to like the conversation about where would we put these, you know, there is office conversion in here. And it's kind of already been a focal point of some of the spots we've identified, which is these are formerly revenue generating spaces that had high utility that are now dead.
Yeah, let's incentivize the turnover.
And they're often in locations that are accessible and close to highways and nowadays close to multiple grocery stores. And so I think that's the type of, those are the sort of layup locations where we know that we already sort of have proof of concept. We've seen a developer interested in making this work. How can we expand that out?
I would, and maybe somebody in the crowd can answer this or just in general. I would be interested in trying to figure out and pull together a list of office conversion projects that have happened in New Hampshire since some of the
This
housing.
conversion?
Yeah, because one of the main things that I feel like, and I agree with you, I think we need to figure it out and push it more, is infrastructure compatibility. Because like my understanding is like an office building, you know, it doesn't have the same sewer hookups, it doesn't have the same water hookups, it doesn't have all of those things. So I'd be interested to see, so that we can be prepared for when somebody does come forward and says, hey, I'm ready to finally do this, of what projects have successfully converted. I think it's, you know, there's obviously small scale and large scale. Like I would love to see some of those ones on Commercial Way. That was like a big point of conversation. But I also would think that we would have to look at what infrastructure needs would, because I think it's like, you know, a commercial large building, it's like one bathroom per X many people.
Yeah.
And that's what they.
And then the other issue is windows.
Yeah.
You know, big buildings with like big interior, you divide those up into dwelling units, you need to have windows.
Yeah.
Egress.
I mean, I did read in here that they were saying, and this makes perfect sense, that tearing it down is often more cost effective
Yeah.
than converting it.
And converting it.
But maybe that's why this tool is
It's here.
incredibly valuable for someone who's like, well, I don't want the risk reward of trying to convert this and it's gonna turn into an absolute mess. But if I know it's a tear down job, I can rebuild it.
And it doesn't have to be every single large building. It can be what we're like conversion of like small single like I think about the building, obviously not gonna happen now, but like the building next to Dunkin' Donuts on Islington. That's a smaller commercial building that maybe
Has the right windows.
yes, or maybe more easily hooked up to main sewer instead of like where things have been run for a project or X, Y, and Z. And like the conversion of smaller office spaces where we're seeing more people that used to rent smaller offices work from home or X, Y, and Z. Versus just, I've always just really thought about it as these giant commercial buildings.
Yeah.
But now maybe we need to think about smaller office conversions that we see in the lines of like courthouses and smaller schools, you know what I mean?
What role would TAC play in reviewing any of the infrastructure issues?
I think they would play sorry, Parkinson's. I think they would play the role that they do in every project, which is, this is what is needed, this is
I mean,
fire, police,
we just
school.
briefly, you know, I asked a similar question last meeting and John kind of answered saying, well, our water use is down but in the same respect, our sewer system has gone from 10 million gallons a day to 30 million gallons a day. So it doesn't, you know, I don't know how to compare that figure where water rates going down and sewer rates going up. So
Higher efficiency, that's what it is, it's higher
but from
efficiency.
10 million to 30 million is,
Yeah.
you know, that's 300%. So, I'm just curious as we try and, you know, work our way through this of what.
Yeah, I think that's where we lean on, at least in my opinion, we lean on that not everything is in the purview of this committee and that there are other boards and other professionals, the same that is, you know, when we talk about schools, where some people are saying, oh, well, we're gonna overload our schools. Well, we have one school that has, because it was in the more affordable area of town, has become a, you know, a place that's slightly overpopulated, but overall our whole school is going down. But that's where, again, I think any project that comes before TAC, school looks at it, fire looks at it, police looks at it, water, sewer looks at it, DPW, planning. And I know that they've modified, you know, plans before and said, hey, this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the capacity thing, I think the plant and the water and the sewer plant have the capacity. There are places in town where there may need to be bigger lines put in, but that's often put on the developer on a development project to make it accommodating. But DPW is always looking at where they're at and where they need to be, and so that's part of the TAC process.
Where they can get a new sidewalk out of them.
Where they can get a new sidewalk.
Oh, you're building here? Great, well, you'll have to
Great place
extend
for a
the bike
sidewalk,
master plan. But I agree with you, Eric. I think all of those things in general, capacity for our city to grow and making sure, as we talk about smart growth in areas versus other areas. I think I speak for a lot of people that, you know, growth in the affordable sector, I think, is a lot easier to support and to get behind than what we see, which is growth in the high-end sector that we have no control over.
That'll take care of itself.
It'll find
I
a
mean, you see it
saturation point
yeah.
On
sooner or
Route
later.
1, where there's very high-priced apartments that have, every single one is empty right now. They just lowered the price.
Did they?
Yeah. So I do think, like, eventually that part of the market, but as we've talked about, you know, the lower end is never gonna catch up.
No, we
On
have to
its
force
own.
that.
Yes.
But I do think this gives us a great tool to work with the private sector in order to make more projects happen.
So we're about halfway through. What else do you feel like for the first few questions that you guys have enough data points
To go,
to go forth?
I think so. Yeah.
okay.
What was the question next? What is definition?
Yeah, I feel like we've touched on a lot of these. What
Yeah.
would the length be? What could the length be? What is the restriction? Where do we want to see change in the city? You know, I feel like that to me is where we really start to talk about the public input process versus just the minds in this room of like, hey, where can you see growth? Where can you, and then whether it's, and then I think, you know, there's places that people say absolutely not, but this committee really, you know, wants to lobby for and yet, you know, and get the city behind and say, no, I really do think this could be a great place. I think kind of much like what happened with Sherburne, where certain people were like, we can absolutely not put it there, and it became a group of people lobbying, okay, like let's find a happy medium of how we can get something there, or some of the rehabs in other places. But from my personal opinion, I think that has to be part of work session and much more community input of like where we really are pushing this. Because I think sometimes we have left the room thinking, this is a great idea to convert this to this. It's underutilized, and then you go and talk to somebody and they're like, that was the worst idea I've ever heard. I'm like, okay, let's try it again, meet in the middle. That's just my opinion. I open it up obviously to the group of their opinions.
I think Sherburne was a great example of compromise
Yeah.
from where it started to where it is. And we don't know where it is, but
Okay. Is there anything else on these 8 questions that we would like to touch on? Or do we feel like, as Mary said, we gave staff?
I guess the qualifying structure, it sounds like you guys feel like any structures fair game and new construction as well.
I think to start with,
Yeah.
and then again, if we,
Why not?
yeah.
I feel like we're missing some of the committee members who would be able to speak to this.
Yes,
Yes.
I can imagine faces
Yes.
raising their hands.
Yes.
Have expertise that I do not.
Yeah, but it does feel like at a baseline, like we shouldn't limit ourselves. And there are people more qualified to say what a qualifying structure is.
And there's plenty plenty of like, if we could make it single family, and if we just never get one,
I thought, like, I was thinking more about for like my neighbor, like there was clearly like there's always like a farmhouse and then the land that was developed on it, and so the
Yeah.
farmhouse is always like on a bigger plot, and that's a
Yeah.
historic structure. But could that be converted from single family to 3 units? And
Yeah.
that was kind of more of my thought, and then
Well, there was an example of that in here, like Lebanon did that, they
Yes.
turned a large home into 4 units.
I mean, I've been a big fan of
It
upzoning.
depends on the status, they have that larger piece of land under, if it's under current, if it's under current use and you have a less of a tax rate, and bringing it out of current use could majorly affect what the development.
Yeah, and like, we, obviously, I think some of us, myself, certainly, workforce is my primary concern here. But when we talk about aging in place, this could be very appealing towards someone who is getting older, who could potentially convert their home into, they live on the ground floor and have a revenue generating apartment up top. Like,
I mean,
that
you
might
see it
be-
in some resorts a lot. I'll look at, I mean, I'm sure nobody knows this sounds good, but you see a lot of older Victorian, oh my God, is that happening to everyone?
it's so hard.
Older Victorian
It's so
homes
underrated hard.
that have been converted into multifamilies. I feel like, and right next to a single family, so again, not necessarily 79E related, but upzoning of single, again, and I think this brainchild has a lot of support, but maybe potentially in the community, turning a single family into even just a duplex or 3 or under multifamily. We just have to make sure we rally full community support.
Yeah, might get some pushback.
My
Yes,
parents did just that. It was sell the house or convert it.
yeah,
And it was a large Victorian they bought in the mid-80s for
Yeah.
nothing. The portion of the house that we grew up in, they basically still retain.
yeah.
I'm happy because my childhood home is still
Yeah.
in my family.
I mean, I lived in one in Union that was like a converted old. I think we've all lived on one, lived in one that's an old converted house.
And that's a question I do have from the legal side is, we can identify opportunity zones where we can use every single part of 79E, but can we do an overlay for the city where it's like home specific? So what we're talking about here, if you do have, it doesn't depend on where you live in the city, it depends on, you have a home that's 40 years or older that needs to be rehabilitated or revitalized, and you can take advantage of this if you are adding units that help to bring, that have the 1/3 at the 80% AMI. Like, is that even a possibility? I don't know, but maybe that's something to explore as well.
What about an individual that retires and then his income falls in the 80% AMI bracket? Does that individual have the opportunity to convert his home into, for tax purposes? Because I think a lot of retirees do not make the same money that they did when they
Yeah.
were working. So if they fall within the parameters of 80%, does that qualify them for?
And that opens up, I think, some bigger dialogue that we have all the time when we're talking about senior and disabled tax relief, that then is pushed the burden onto other taxpayers. We hear it all, you know what I mean? So I do think that is an interesting question to pose if they were staying in their same home, but using 79E, but not creating any more housing. Is that what you're saying? Like not
Yeah, more or less in that line. I mean, everybody looks for,
a loophole?
a loophole.
Yeah.
Whether it's big enough to drive a truck through or just enough
Or
to
pinhole,
sneak
yeah.
through, then, you don't see that stuff until it's actually in place, and then you start seeing what,
Yeah.
A retiree buys a fixer upper,
Yeah,
retires, gets the incentive.
yeah. So then it does, and that's where it's like, does single family make sense, or does single family allow for more loopholes without adding units?
There's a lot of unknowns here too.
Well, I think they would be able to do what you're saying, they just couldn't sell it for the market rate. They could only sell it for the
They would have to sell it at
affordable.
that rate.
For the term, for the term of
For the term of the.
It would be a risk too.
But that would also be to any transferee, so any, you would assume
Or any transferee, they can sell it.
inheritance,
Yep.
any of those things would be locked into that covenant
Yep.
also.
So they couldn't do it like as an opportunity to flip a house and make the most money possible, but they could do it. And they could sell it, but the sale price would be dependent on that 80% AMI of the new buyer.
It also would be a risk in terms, if there's only 10 years, and so, you know, we all hope to live forever, it could be a pretty crushing increase in, like, in your taxes after 10 years, that it might not be the incentive.
Yeah, I think in that situation, you'd weigh whether
Like,
the
do you think you got another 10?
elderly exemption max
Right.
versus, which we have the highest in the state, is more beneficial in use versus trying to flip your structure, put money into it, and use 79E for a single family home. But yeah, I agree with you, like, thinking about these one-off scenarios is
How
part
does
of.
it get ruined?
Yeah, that's,
How's the
how
party
does this
ruined?
get ruined? Yeah. And again, I'm just pulling up like in Conway right here. And again, you know, towns and cities operate differently, but like in Conway, they have, a determination of qualified structure by the select board. The property owner must consent to inspection, assessing department to establish prior values. So maybe it's before something like that, then it, you know, the city decides, okay, well we actually missed an assessment on this. Now it's worth actually this much. It will freeze at that. So yeah, I think there's tons of. It is, as we're all talking through it is hard because nobody's done it.
Right.
And well, nobody's done projects in it, and only, as you've said, one town. And Conway's struggling to build everything. You know what I mean?
I think that's a town where condos, it's a condo town.
Yeah.
Because it's a resort town, so that's where everybody gathers up for condo. Now, those places might not even be considered for qualifying for this type of housing.
But I think that's what they're trying to.
It's like Lincoln.
Yeah, but I think they're trying to trigger the opposite. They're saying like we're a dying community. We're a dying community, not as in like the residents, but as in like we're not getting year-round residents. So we're trying to push things that will not be used as condos, that will not be used as rentals, that will be incentivize people like, hey, come build here. It's a great quality of life. You'll love it.
Yeah.
Please come move back here. I mean, you look at the rate.
Workers to staff or
Yeah.
businesses, yeah.
Yeah.
We're on the opposite end of the spectrum, where we're like, we want some people to be able to stay here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've even seen that in Conway though, when like you have these developers that have built these beautiful developments but they're all single family and they're large, and it's then affected the neighbors' tax rates, which we've seen here too, where they're like,
I mean, Lincoln, you can't recognize Lincoln. It's just
Yeah.
condos from one end to the other, you know? So that's the way the development wanted to proceed.
yeah. Listen, I grew up in a townhouse, so sometimes they're not too bad. But yeah, I agree with you. It's just it's a different, the urbanization of some of the smaller communities and like the way that the housing looks and is developed is just different than what has always been. Okay, so I feel like we've gone over a lot of these questions. Does anyone else have, and staff, you've given you, Eric, please.
I mentioned something earlier just about the status of the Sherburne project, and I was just, because I couldn't find it, but I mean, I did find it and tried to, there was a project update around the end of July or something, but I couldn't understand. It said that PHA was the manager of the property. Does that mean a final ground lease has been signed between PHA and the city? Or is that still?
I don't think so.
No, they haven't. I didn't think so.
No.
But it does specifically state that PHA is the manager of that property. Now, I don't know what that means.
My understanding is
I
that
just wanted some clarity on it
the
because
city,
Keeping it up.
yeah, they have a responsibility to maintain the property while waiting for the development to happen.
right. Well, I mean, that extends into, well, if they manage it, if they have liability of it, or where is the status of the low income tax credits with PHA to see, are they 70% complete, or, I mean, it's a $40 million project, so it's not,
Pricey.
you know, it's gonna require a heck of a lot of, low income tax credits.
If you'd like,
Low income.
if this committee would like, we can request an update from them to see if there's any new news.
So, but officially, there hasn't, and I didn't know that there was still gonna be a public process prior to the signing of the final ground lease between the city.
They've gotten all their development approvals.
Yeah,
They can proceed once they get everything in place.
once they get funding.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a feather in the cap of this committee, that we brought it to a particular state, and then it, you know, we all know how things have developed since then, but I'm just curious to know. I mean, they gotta finish Lafayette Road first, but I think maybe they'll be ready after that but that's a 2-year project. I don't know if they can handle two projects at the same time. All right, well, that kind of clears things up, because there's no knowledge with you or anybody that they signed a final
I
ground
don't believe
lease.
so.
Okay,
Not that,
No, it has to go to
I know this.
I was gonna say, it has to come to council, and it has not come to council.
I know I read in the draft that they have until, I think, December 31st to 27th,
7, yeah,
to either, you know, sign up or sign out.
yeah.
All right.
And
Thank
I
you.
think that was based on some of their financing deadlines and phasing of the project naturally.
Right.
Okay, well, Eric, you did perfect leading us into other business.
What's that?
I said you did perfect leading us into other business.
I thought we were there.
We are. Is there any other business that the committee would like to discuss? Okay, if not, I will happily open the floor to public comment. Please just state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Maeve Nolan. I'm with the Workforce Housing Coalition of Greater Seacoast. So I'm not a Portsmouth resident, but I work in Portsmouth, and obviously have been following everything that the Housing Committee has been doing for the last year or so, and been taking notes throughout this entire conversation. But first I want to say, you know, I really appreciate how much attention you've all been putting towards this. You know, we work in over 50 communities across New Hampshire and southern Maine, and we don't often see as much engagement month to month and coming back to things. So I really am appreciative that the ball continues to be rolling, even if it is not as fast as you would all like it to be. I am here to tell you that you are doing much better than a lot of other places. So you can take that with you for the rest of the evening. Just a couple things that I thought it might be helpful to clarify, as I had access to Google back there and other communities that I have seen. The one thing I wanted to distinguish between, which is very confusing, is the housing opportunity zone and opportunity zones.
Yes.
So I believe the Conway example that you brought up has to do more with the opportunity zones. 2.0 is what it's called, and that's a federal program where they have designated, I can't remember if it's HUD or a different agency, but a federal program that has designated different tracts, census tracts throughout New Hampshire, throughout the country. And the idea there is that it's really to support rural economic development. So housing is inside of that, of course, but it is not the same as the housing opportunity zone, which is a piece of 79E that Conway is the first to have enacted.
So they're double dipping.
I know. So Conway's doing a little bit of both, obviously facing their own struggles, but I do think that it's also a fair comparison to be making. Obviously, it's great to compare to the one other community that has been doing it, but there are some similarities, obviously, tourism-based economies, the need for workforce housing in particular, so definitely some through lines there. But the housing opportunity zone is, I think someone said it, but it is an overlay district that goes through the process of becoming an overlay district just like any other. So like the GNOD, for example, it would be the same process. Obviously, there is this added layer of community engagement that is needed in a process like this. But I do want to say too that you've already done a little bit of that community engagement process with the master plan. So I think that there's an opportunity here, especially for the what goes where conversation. Where would you like to see development? What would you like to see in this type of neighborhood? Things like that. That you already have a good starting point there, so you're really not starting from ground zero, which I think is great. Let me see. And I guess last note on that would be that if you didn't want to start with the entire city, which would be very, it'd be great if it worked, I guess. I think the GNOD would be a perfect pilot area to do something like this. And, you know, you can make whatever the terms you want the 79E Housing Opportunity Zone to be. You could also say you're within the GNOD as well, and you could make some adjustments to the GNOD. So if, I think someone said earlier, you know, could we set up some sort of affordability has a different timeline than the tax relief? You could change the affordability timeline in the GNOD, maybe. You'd have to obviously go through the ordinance changing process, but that is a possibility. I also wanted to say that there is totally a way to set up a scale for 79E with the percentage of affordability and the tax relief incentive. And so you can really say, and for affordable projects, it can actually go up to 15 years of tax relief now with HB 1103. So, you know, you could say if you're gonna do 100% affordable, you can get 15 years of tax relief. If you're gonna do 50%, you can get 10 years. If you're gonna do the bare minimum of a third, you could do, you know, 7 years or whatever you wanted it to be. And even those in themselves can be a scale. So you can say a third is 7 to 10 or 5 to 7. So I think this is a really great opportunity for you all to be thinking about, you know, all of the things that you've talked about today in terms of what the future will look like and what does it mean when things time out and all of that. But I think too, you can make it as flexible as you want it to be. The Housing Opportunity Zone statute itself within RSA 79E is very short. So, you know, it's all really up to interpretation. I guess 2 more things that I wrote down. One was that HB 1103, which I think Jerry might also be bringing up, but that's a new law that was just passed in 2026, which expands a little bit on housing opportunity zones. It also expands conversions within the office conversion statute to include commercial and industrial as well. So there could be an opportunity there. So you're not only thinking about office conversions, but also thinking about commercial and industrial zones. If those exist, you can like layer it on top. So if it's a housing opportunity zone, you can allow new construction to qualify. So there's a good amount of synergies going on. And then the last thing is, you know, making sure that, especially as you go through your public engagement process, making sure that everybody knows that this is still a development project, that is still going to go through all of the land use review board processes, and that it's not just some willy-nilly developer gets to do whatever they want, and they're getting a tax break, and they don't, you know. So I think framing it, I think someone said it earlier, as a win-win for everyone is totally the way to approach it. And I would suggest, I love that you talked to Dover already, I would also suggest talking to Rochester, because they have had 79E for a really long time for revitalization specifically, and they're starting to see their projects come back on the market and adding millions to their tax revenue, which is really impressive for a place like Rochester. And obviously, in Portsmouth, those parcels are going to be valued at a pretty high rate, I'm sure, in 10 or 15 years or whenever things get, back up to whatever they are assessed at. So, yeah, a lot of different bullet points. Happy to answer questions. Also happy to just say that, the Workforce Housing Coalition is a resource not in this hour-and-a-half block. So if you do have questions on other communities, what they've been up to and things like that, we're always happy to help.
Thanks for bringing up Rochester, because they are one of, I feel like they used this a very long time ago, and now we're seeing it.
They're doing good work up there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
So, Gerald Duffy, 428 Pleasant Street. Maeve is an absolute gem, and I hope you use her organisation as a resource. So I handed out a couple of things. I'm not going to go through those because I just felt like they would be maybe helpful as you go through the continuing process. But so what I'm interested in today is I'm representing the biggest advocacy group, if you like, or entity in town for housing. So we've got the public comment sessions coming up, public input sessions coming up next month, and so part of our job, as I see it, is to educate the public as much as possible, and explain to them what's actually happening here. So a big part of my job has been communication, a lot of research and so on, but actually communicating some of these complicated things. So as I go through and you've credit to you, following what Maeve said, you've taken about 150 action items and squished them down to 19. That in itself is quite an achievement. But as I go through the items, I would think I wouldn't try and explain all of these to the public because some of them are not quite as relevant. Some of them will be very relevant. So with things like the expansion of tax relief through 79E, there's some wonderful examples. Ollie mentioned one, and I know a number of families in surrounding neighborhoods who are overhoused, right? They're my age or slightly under, kids have left, and they've got too much house. They want to stay where they are because they love where they are. They want to stay in the city. And there's nowhere, if they wanted to downsize, there's really nowhere available to do that. So one of the options, of course, is to be able to either create a two-family unit, either rent or sell one half of that property and stay where they are. So that, that's the kind of scenario that would be fairly easy for us to explain to someone very quickly and very, very simply. And the same goes for some of the other items, expanding multifamily zoning, single family to multi-unit conversion. So those are all about increasing supply of a certain kind of housing. The easier we can make it for people to do these things, the better, and I think you're on that. The one thing that I would draw your attention to, probably more than anything though, is the question that most people will ask, which is, where's the affordable housing? Where's the permanently affordable housing in this plan? And it's really not there yet. There's no, I went through the list and there are a couple of items that could potentially have an effect, including the Housing Trust Fund, but there's nothing there, and it's not really pulled out in the report, in terms of creating more of the kind of housing we now see at Ruth Lewin Griffin Place, which is permanently affordable workforce housing, and which we will get some of at Sherburn, probably I think about 90 units, and then with the Kane land swap, maybe another 80. But there are none of those things are mentioned in the plan so far, and I think they really should be, because that's the biggest question people will have. Is there's a lot of cynicism out there right now about housing in general. There's a lot of cynicism about local government and what it can do. So I think this is an opportunity for you to address that. And, you know, we could, as a communicator, as an advocate, we can be part of that mechanism. But we have to have the content to deal with. So I would urge you to give some real thought to how you want to be able to answer this major question that people are going to have, which is where is the real permanently affordable housing? What are our plans for it? You have identified city lots. There is expertise around. I would highly recommend if you want more feedback on this to talk to Ryan Pope, who is an expert in this field and knows all about how these projects, these non-profit projects are stacked. Those capital stacks are very hard to build. He knows about that. He knows about the kind of offline conversations you need to have with developers sometimes that wouldn't happen in this public environment, but are necessary to move these things along. So I would encourage you to sort of kind of not ignore that gap. The rest of it, you know, I think there's some really great things there, and I think people are going to respond to that positively. And we'll certainly project, you know, we will compliment your work, and we'll try and highlight the things that you've accomplished.
Thanks so much,
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Sue Sterry. I live on Broad Street here in Portsmouth. I just want to dovetail on what Jerry was saying. I think for years I've thought workforce housing, affordable housing, and senior housing are three different things. I don't think you can lump workforce and affordable in the same category. They're not the same. A workforce implies that people are working, and yes, they may need a lower rate to live. I agree with all of that, but it's still not the same as affordable for a family of four who's, you know, just above the poverty line or what have you. And seniors the same way with fixed income, which, you know, it does go up with inflation depending, you know, I'm talking about Social Security. I don't know about most people that would have pensions or what have you, probably don't have to worry about that. There are waiting lists for our, is it the public Portsmouth Housing Authority that runs
Our senior,
like
yeah.
Marginson and
Yep.
they run it all
Yep.
for that. And the buildings that are going out on Lafayette Road, those are workforce, right? Not necessarily for low income or
Senior.
in the same way at Sherburne, right?
Yes.
Right, so I think there's a big gap, and I haven't heard. Right,
The
but
VHA
affordable,
projects.
right, but affordable, well, okay. So you're saying it would be less than what you could charge a workforce? See, that's what my issue is.
Yeah, so that's,
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, we talk, I mean, we talked a little bit too, but I think it's one of the things that this committee has talked about is like the mix of affordability and making sure that projects aren't stuck with one caveat and can do a mix. So they can do so many units at 20 or 40%, so many at 60%, so many at 80%. It's kind of my understanding is kind of the new wave that they're trying to build affordable or housing authority type housing is, and please feel free to flag me down if I'm crazy, is that they're trying to transition into
Mixed use of the whole facility.
yeah, and so they can have so many units per, you know, each demographic.
So is that something this committee will be working on, that there's that wide range as opposed to, like if you sign up to try to get into any of the housing authority buildings, there's a long wait list for no matter where you go, and there always has been, and there probably will be until if this type of situation goes on, but that will be a part of it for people on fixed incomes. I mean, can we force people, builders, to do that?
I don't think we can force them, but it seems to be the trending way through like HUD and stuff that now those allowances are there and they're seeing. I'm not crazy, me, right?
No, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, because
There's been legislative changes that have allowed for different variations of affordability in the same project.
Yeah, so usually the way that people think about financing for their projects is that it averages to a certain amount. So,
Right.
you know, we've even seen workforce housing projects that include some market rate housing so that they can have the
Right, I
much lower.
understand the math.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing in New Hampshire specifically is that workforce housing has a definition. So it has to be matched to the area median income. It's about 60% of area median income.
Oh, so it's median income,
Yeah,
okay.
so that's a little bit bigger than just Portsmouth. But you know, that is sort of the way that they think about it. In other states that don't have, that's a state statute that defines workforce housing. In other states that don't have that, workforce and affordable tend to be used a lot more interchangeably,
Right.
which becomes really difficult in messaging, and we deal with it all the time as
Yeah.
the Workforce Housing Coalition. But yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Thank you. So my question is, I mean, what are the incentives for developers? Because other than the tax break and it, you know, draws it out and gets it back, what other incentive is there for people, for the developer from this action?
From 79E,
Right.
it's tax-based incentive.
That's,
Yeah, so this is us adding it to the other incentives we have, like, you can get more units, the more affordable, you know, we have some, how do you say?
So you
various
trade
sticks?
off, so if you build 10 extra units,
Yes,
3 of them have to be this and you get 7
correct.
more.
And that's what we're seeing, that we haven't seen a lot of trade-off, where people have said, oh yeah, I'll build these 20 more units and make 50 of them affordable. They've just said no. I mean, that's what we saw over at the Christmas tree shop, where we like tried to push them, say, hey, we'll give you more if you give us some affordable. And they said, no, we're actually gonna build underneath what we're allowed to build on that lot. So the idea is to bring in 79E to add a hopefully more lucrative or more appealing incentive to get the housing.
Right, so, and is that in our like zoning, so that who regulates, we can offer a developer that kind of a deal? So if he comes in and only wants,
That's like in our zoning, like in the gateway.
Incentives are in our zoning.
Yeah.
This would be separate, it would go through city council.
Yes, city ordinance.
And those are updated with when we had land use, right? We updated a lot of those, or we really started to look at them and say like, this is not working, this is not working.
I think, I did some, but currently there's over 2,500 new units available in the city, whether they're permitted, under construction, or completed.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's 5% that's in that affordable category.
Yeah, and that's what we're saying, is that
Right.
we saw through the pipeline that the incentives that we are offering aren't hitting. And then some of the developers said, hey, actually, we use these incentives in other we use 79E in other communities. What if you guys added it here? That would make things more appealing. So that's
there are developers that are willing to wait for their money for the,
yeah. Eric Chinburg uses it. They've used it in Rochester. They used it in somewhere else. There's developments. Yep, Newmarket is a big one. Manchester, the big mill, used it.
no, I was just curious
No,
because
I-
5 years ago or 10 years ago, developers weren't necessarily interested in
No.
any of these incentives.
So
I
that's
know
where you
the
had-
economy's changed. Well, no, thank you, that's good information. And the other thing, does 79E, does that sort of, is it rent control type thing? So like they built the house and you've got, 10 at 1,000, I know that's unreal, but, at 3,000, 2,000 and 1,000, do those rents have to stay the same during that 10-year period that you're getting the tax break?
No, New Hampshire does not have any type of rent control as far as I know, but it's income based still. So it's based off that median income.
So it is
it's not-
It's
Yes.
controlled, but not specifically rent control.
Yeah.
there's control. And so people that live in these developments will have to prove every year or their tax
Oh,
returns or
How,
what have you?
however it's managed through.
Yeah, covenant, yeah.
Yeah, but it's the same, like Ruth, like right now I actually, because I know a friend who is moving in, like Ruth Griffin has a long wait list, but they're finding that people are slowly earning out.
Yeah.
So that list is actually moving a lot faster than they had anticipated, because you know, every year, whatever HUD requires and the PHA requires, that annual statement, people are
Are earning their way out, yeah,
Yes.
no, I get it.
and it's hard because they're earning just enough to be out of it,
And not
but
enough to
not
get-
enough. And I think that's for me, Sue, just one of the biggest struggles is our median income is high. And so sometimes when you say to somebody, oh yeah, like workforce housing is someone making $60,000 a year, they're like, that's crazy, they should be able to afford rent. Well, if you're making $60,000 a year and you're paying 50%, 60% of your income, technically you're affording it, you're not homeless, but you're not economically viable for the long term. So that to me is one of the conversations I have with people all the time. They're like, oh, well, this, it's like, no, we have a higher median income.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So in essence then, if you were on a fixed income and it doesn't go up, you could stay at the same place for the same amount of rent. You just have to prove it every year type thing.
Yep.
Right, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now,
So like I think a
I
lot of
can see
senior
how that
housing,
fits in.
they, you know what I mean, that are based, like the PHA senior, yeah, that's based on Social Security and stuff. You're not seeing them as actively priced out as you're seeing some of the workforce as they're growing in income.
no, those questions really clear it up. Am I only, who decides on the housing opportunity zone? Is that something you guys will put together and present, or you guys will put something together and present it and say, this is what we think, and people would vote on it?
I think this
in
committee will make a recommendation on it.
Yeah, and then I would assume it would go to the council would refer it to the planning board,
Yeah.
the planning board feedback, just the same as like we would do with any
Right.
ordinance zone. You know, we are not a voting body, we are a recommendation board.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I mean, yeah.
So, but I would assume, and I know that it's obviously, as we know, high up on the list, to get things moving. But I think Jerry made a good point about the master plan. I know that that's been a huge conversation in this group too, of not doubling up some of the work and also using the master plan to support a push through of 79E, even though, because the master plan is on its way to the finish line.
And one quick question, all of this, like your memorandum and stuff that you're talking about is online under planning?
It's in the meeting packet. If you go to the meeting packet for tonight's meeting,
Okay,
which will be in the archive page now instead of.
right,
Yeah.
so that's where, but
Yep,
do we
it
have
has the
had
full
any-
meeting packet, has 79E spelled out, it has what Conway did for.
Yeah, I started going over
Yep,
it,
it's
it's a
all there.
lot of stuff.
Yep.
But the other things too are online under
Housing Committee archive, right?
Housing Committee.
Yeah, there has it.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, what?
Nope, it's not relevant.
Okay. Can you check, there's nobody online, just us? Okay, if there's no other further business, then we can all go home.
We don't even have to make a motion to
No.
adjourn, do we?
No.
Hi, guys.